Buonasera, everyone. I'm happy to have you all here. Thanks to those who've come to past lectures. Welcome to people who are at my talk for the first time. The first thing I should absolutely do is, and I want to do very much, is to thank people who already have mailed gratuities. This is so appreciated. It energizes me. It's a stimulus to continue this work. And it's a grateful thank you to you for having reimbursed, the many hours that have gone into this. I've enjoyed doing it. I'm going to continue doing it because, as I've already mentioned, we guides here in Umbria, at least those working with Americans like me, there won't be work for at least a year. And let us hope that work will return soon and that all of you can return soon. Now, this evening we'll be talking about Italy's Mediterranean diet from art to the table. Why did I specifically put in the word Italy's? Because the Mediterranean diet, which is a UNESCO cultural intangible, World Heritage, declared so in 2010, includes countries of the Mediterranean basin. And the sponsors of this appeal to declare the Mediterranean diet UNESCO cultural intangible were countries on the Mediterranean basin: Italy, Portugal, Crete, Greece, Croatia, Morocco. But the Mediterranean diet in Morocco might be highlighted with couscous. The Mediterranean diet in Italy might be highlighted with bread and with pasta. The Mediterranean diet in Greece might be highlighted with moussaka, let us say, for example. So I've specifically called this Italy's Mediterranean diet, the Mediterranean diet as interpreted in Italy. Now, to start our discussion, we must feast our eyes on this beautiful view of a coastline of southern Italy, not the Amalfi Coast, which is more well known, but the beautiful Cilento coast to the south of Amalfi. Some of you may have been to Paestum and seen the tremendous Greek ruins of Paestum. Paestum on south, almost heading towards Calabria, is the exquisite Costa Cilento. Now, why have I got the Costa Cilento as the start of this talk? Because in many ways, the Mediterranean diet started on the Costa Cilento. It started with a person who lived for about 40 years on the Mediterranean on this Mediterranean coast section called Cilento, in a small village called Piopo, just outside of a bigger town called Piopica. And I'm going to show you these right on the map here. Here we have a map showing you the Costa Cilento. You can see Paestum up there at the top with a Greek temple. And you can see circled there the little town of Piopo, which is right outside the village of Polica. In the little village of Piopo, Ansel Keys lived for 40 years. He returned to the States in, I think, 2004 at the age of 100, dying at 101. And he really is, if you will, the grandfather of the Mediterranean diet. Why? He was a noted physiologist, biologist of the University of Minnesota. He also did research on rations for soldiers, which were rich in proteins and vitamins, but easy to transport. They were named after him. They're called K rations. And Ansel Keys wondered in his years living in Italy and his many times visiting Italy, why there were so many centenarians in southern Italy. People living to nearly 100, over 100. What was the answer? He studied above all the diet. And he published a study called the 7 Countries Study, in which he studied the diets of 7 countries, not just Mediterranean basin countries. Some were. I think Greece, Portugal, Morocco were in that, but he also included Japan, the United States, Canada, and Finland. And he's comparing diets and health, especially the health of one's heart. He believed that the unsaturated fats, the olive oil used in the Mediterranean basin countries, was instrumental into living a heart-healthy life. And he was lauded by the people of Italy after this publication of the seven country study. At the time when he was living in Polica, Piopi, that area, there was not the terminology Mediterranean diet. It comes into the language in the 1950s, 1960s, but really after his study. And what does Ansel Keys indicate as primary focus of the Mediterranean diet? Olive oil. Olive oil is an essential food in the Mediterranean diet. It's recommended in the Mediterranean diet that 4 tablespoons a day are consumed. We do that easily. By the time you have your bruschetta, maybe in the evening, as you can see right here, in your salad, when we cook with it, yes, abundant use of olive oil. It's nice and green. It should be a brilliant green. This is actually our own olive oil, and also in this photo here. And the olive varieties in Umbria are many. We have 3 varieties, Lecino, Frantoio, and Moraiolo. These are 3 varieties particularly grown here in Umbria. And here we have an image of our son Keegan picking our olive trees. We pick in November. We used to pick in November, December. With climate change now, olives are ripening sooner. We're even picking in October. With climate change, we've had dilemmas for a couple years, fewer olives due to parasites, the weather too warm. We have Keegan here on the left, and on the right, we have olive pickers in a mosaic, which is a Roman mosaic of the 2nd century AD. And you can see them climbing the trees to pick the olives. One man has olives on his shoulder in a basket. And here we have Pino picking our olives, and you wear around your neck, we used to wear baskets, now maybe a bucket like Pino has, and it's kept around your neck with a strap. And he's following the advice, very careful advice, of Pliny the Elder, Plinio il Vecchio. Pliny the Elder was the Roman historian who also documented the explosion of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD. And I know the exact date. It's August 24th, 79 AD, because August 24th is my birthday. And Pliny was an eyewitness observer of the explosion of Vesuvius. He was in a ship off the coast and saw everything. And he wrote a tract about the picking of olives, saying, respect your olive trees, do not batter them, do not bash them, strip them down gently. Pino's following the advice of Pliny the Elder right here. In this mosaic on the right, we have people picking olives, and this is an image from a mosaic, which is in the Museum of Tunis, the Museo del Bardo. Everybody, did you know that the Museo del Bardo in Tunis has the largest collection in the entire world of Roman mosaics? Tunis, we're talking about ancient Carthage. And this is a mosaic in the Museum of Del Bardo, 3rd century AD. By the way, the Museo del Bardo was also the first archaeological museum ever opened in the Arab world. On the left, we have a mosaic of the 2nd century AD, also Roman, of pressing the olives at the mill. On the right, Pino is about to taste our olive oil as it just comes out of the equipment at the mill after the pressing. This was last November. And we take our olive oil home in steel canisters. Whoops, I went one ahead. I didn't mean to here. Pino on the right, about to load our olive oil into the van. We have a good sized canister and a couple cans here of olive oil. And on the left is our farm neighbor, Chiarina. I was visiting her one November, and they just brought the olive oil home from the mill. So, of course, she said, you have to taste our olive oil. It's the pride of every rural family. The pride of another rural neighbor of ours, Pepe. Look at the quantity of olive oil he has. I think he had 3 canisters of olive oil. He single-handedly picked the olives from his 100 olive trees. Now, who does the pressing? None of us have presses. The olives are taken to a community mill. We have one in a small village outside of C.E.T where the pressing is done. And when we were coming home from the mill, an obligatory stop last year was at Peppa's house, our farm neighbor and dear friend Peppa, who wanted to have a verification of our olive oil. And Pino wanted her to. He said, Peppa will know if it was olio buono or not. And of course, it was delicious. She toasted some bread on her wood stove to make bruschetta, rubbed it with garlic, put a little salt on the top, and then drizzled the olive oil. Olives, of course, appear in mosaics and frescoes of Pompeii. This is a fresco of Pompeii. It was on the wall of a villa. And in the upper left-hand corner, you have olives in a beautiful silver cup. And look at the skill of the artist who painted this fresco. Can you see the shading around the olives? The shading around the silver cup. And on the right of the silver cup is a plate of peas, legumes, an integral part of the Mediterranean diet. And below the peas, probably doves plucked, will be roasted in the oven for squab, because the Mediterranean diet gives emphasis on white meats a couple times a week, 2 to 3 times a week. Red meats maybe once a week. Do you know the Romans didn't even eat beef at all because oxen were used to work the fields? Olive oil was an appreciated gift. This is an image of a Greek vase, which could hold Greek, I should say, Etruscan, but they're very close to the Greeks in their art and so forth. The Etruscans settled on the western coast of central Italy, 6th to 4th century BC. And this is a beautiful image of an Etruscan pelike, it's called, which is a vase for holding of wine or olive oil. And it's in the Museum of Cerveteri. And I'm going to show you on a map in a minute where Cerveteri is. And this vase dates from the 6th century BC. On this map, you can see the ancient Etruria, the Etruscan area of Umbria. Who were these Etruscans? This Pacific people, very artistic people, genteel people. We think they immigrated from present-day Anatolia, Turkey. They settled on the western side of the Tiber. The darker green shows you Etruria, as it was settled in 750 BC. You see the initials there, AC, meaning Avanti Cristo, before Christ. And then in light green, the expansion of the Etruscans from 750 to 500 BC, they're all the way up past Bologna to the area of Mantova. Now, Cerveteri, where the pelike was from, it's in the Museum of Cerveteri. You can see on the map, it's the southernmost Etruscan town that we're depicting here. That's depicted on the map and that I also mentioned related to the base. Just north of Cerveteri is the town of Tarquinia. You want to remember that name because we are going to see frescoes from tombs of Tarquinia. Now, if you look over upper right, you can see that Cortona was Etruscan, Arezzo was Etruscan, Volterra, you may be very familiar with the extraordinary Etruscan Museum in Volterra, Perugia. We have some wonderful exhibit. We have a wonderful exhibit in our Archaeological Museum of Perugia on Etruscan finds in our area. And then the city of Orvieto, which was called Belsna by the Etruscans. Olives appear in Etruscan frescoes. This is a fresco of the ancient Etruscan town of Tarquinia, and this dates to about the 6th century BC. And look at the joy and the festivity as they dance and play their musical instruments. They're carrying a calyx on the left, probably a cup for offering of wine, dancing among the olive trees. A tenet of the Mediterranean diet is the importance of sharing food with others, irrespective of ages. Elderly unite with youth in sharing the Mediterranean diet and sharing the foods. Lawyers sit down and share foods with carpenters or bricklayers. This is the intermingling of social classes sharing the foods of the Mediterranean diet. It is a tenet of the Mediterranean diet, UNESCO Mediterranean diet, cultural intangible world heritage, that the foods of the Mediterranean world should be eaten and shared in company. Festivals commemorated, traditions commemorated, ancient methods of cultivation and traditional methods of cultivation of the land to be respected. Now, in this pyramid here, I'm first giving you this pyramid of the Mediterranean diet in Italian for a specific reason. I want to show you along the bottom, you can see those four ovals, aspects of the Mediterranean diet, which should be coupled with the foods. One, attività fisica. I'm sure you can get that. Physical activity. Two, convivialità. Living together, literally it means conviviality, means to live together with vitality. Sharing together. Stagionalità, seasonalness, eating seasonal foods. And prodotti locali, local products. The base of the Mediterranean diet is fruit, 1 to 2 portions a day, vegetables, 1 to 2 portions, pasta, bread, rice, couscous, and other cereals, preferably whole wheat, 1 to 2 portions. Do you know that Italy has, I'm not sure of the exact number, an infinite number of grains, of wheat grains, many more varieties in the United States. And this seems to be one of the reasons that there is less celiac disease in our country, celiac illness, because this is a people, the Italian people, the Mediterranean people, who eat varieties of wheat. And then daily consumption is required in the Mediterranean diet of milk and milk products, olive oil, 3 to 4 portions, which means 3 to 4 tablespoons. And then advised is abundant use of herbs, spices, garlic, and onion. And do you know why? So that you cut down on your salt intake. Seasoning food with spices, garlic, onions, and herbs. And not only fruit, but fruit and seeds. The snacks of Italians, what are they? Munching on seeds. Pino's favorite snack is the lupini, a kind of little legume that he snacks on, and olives. And then you could see white meat or chicken, 1 to 2 portions a week is advised. Also crustaceans, shellfish, fish, 1 to 2 portions a week, legumes, a couple portions, eggs, 3 to 4 portions, even sweets allowed, 1 or 2. Wine, by the way, as desired in limited quantity and accompanying foods. Salami, oh, these Italians get 1 portion a week if they're following the Mediterranean diet. Meat, 2 portions if it's red meat. And here's the Mediterranean diet in English language, and I'll put this second so you can see here along the bottom. They put along the bottom, be physically active, enjoy meals with others. That's the famous conviviality. And then the basis, again, is fruits, vegetables, grains, mostly whole wheat, olive oil, beans, nuts, legumes, seeds, herbs, and spices. Base every meal on these foods. Drink water is indicated. Fish and seafood, often 2 to 3 times a week, poultry, etc. And you can see in the upper left-hand corner, wine in moderation. Now, how about this display of the Mediterranean diet? This is absolutely extraordinary. This is one of the most exciting things I discovered when researching this talk. This is a mosaic. And this is a mosaic of the 2nd century AD. And this mosaic is called an astoros oikos from the Greek. Excuse me, I said 2nd century AD. It's 2nd century BC. Astoros oikos, or you could just call it astoroton, is a mosaic of an unswept floor. And the first astoros oikos, or osteron, was done by a Greek mosaicist called Sosos in the 2nd century BC. And it was for the floor, it's a mosaic floor, of a villa of a very wealthy person. And basically, what is on the floor are a variety of fruits that tell the guests coming the abundance and the preciousness, or should we say the cost even, of the foods they'll be served in this home of a very wealthy host. You could see a crab leg in the upper corner. You could see sea urchins, little bits of seafood, dates, figs, olive pits, nuts. And I put a detail here, the lower left. There's even a little mouse eating a walnut shell. He's in the picture here he's in the mosaic of the lower bottom. And next to him is the Turk shell. That shows wealth, because Turk shells were also ground for dyes, which were very treasured by wealthy Roman women. And there's even the claw of a chicken there. There was a French gourmet, Savarin, who once said, let me just see this exact. He said in French, but I'll tell you in English, "Tell me what you eat and I'll tell you who you are." These unswept floor mosaics of the Roman period are really telling us, I'll show you what's left over, and that will tell you who I am. Here's another one. And this one is on the floor of a villa of Aquileia. Aquileia, the Roman town, which is now known as Udine in northern Italy. And here you see even the head of a fish and a little bit of a squid over there to the left, walnuts, olives, almonds, a great variety of foods, even as well as a rose. Now, who would clean up these floors? The servants, or sometimes dog or cats would be right under there, as you can see right here. There's a little dog here in the lower right. This is a fresco of an unswept floor, and this is actually from a French chateau. It's of the 5th century AD. And this unswept floor mosaic, or Astoroton, has dates in the upper right-hand corner, beans, eggshells, seafood always, because this shows the wealth of the proprietor, lots of seafood. And this is actually from a museum of Tunis, Roman, 2nd century AD. Another aspect of the Mediterranean diet expressed in art is expressed in the extraordinary Neapolitan creche scenes. And this is a part of a Neapolitan creche scene. They had hundreds of figures in them. These figures would be done in terracotta, but generally they're about 6 to 7 inches high. Little loaves of bread and so forth can be about as big as your fingernail. In all these Mediterranean diet crib scenes, there's the continual reflection on the tenet of the Mediterranean diet. It's always portrayed conviviality, sharing of foods, seasonal foods, traditional foods. If you look at the people, they seem to be in Baroque dress. They're in the dress of about the 17th, 18th century, really, because the Neapolitan creche scene comes to flower with the reign of Charles III, Bourbon king in the 18th century. But the creche scene itself originates with Francis of Assisi, and this is a fresco attributed to Giotto. We won't go into that because that's a whole other lecture. In the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi, probably 1299 to 1301, and we have a representation here of the first crib scene. In 1223, in order to make Christ's birth alive to the people, Francis, with permission of the papacy at the time, had an ox and an ass set in a stall. Mass was set in the countryside, recreating really the whole ambience of the first crib scene. And it said the baby Jesus appeared miraculously as Francis was preaching. You can see Francis in the foreground holding the baby Jesus, and you might say, hey, where are all the peasants? The actual scene took place in the peasants, among the peasants. But this is in the Basilica of St. Francis in Assisi. So we can only have wealthy nobility present. Why? Because the Basilica was above all, I hate to tell you, to do honor to the popes who commissioned it. I know not much in the spirit of Franciscanesimo, but again, that's another lecture. Now, then the Neapolitan creche scene will develop in the 18th century. There were depictions of creche scenes after Francis's preaching about the first, birth of Christ, the first Christmas. And they were in churches. They were often done in wood. They were painted. There were exquisite ones in churches of, all over Italy, particularly in Naples in the 11th century, and then in the 14th century. But until the 18th century, these creche scenes were in the churches. With the period of the Neapolitan creche scene in the 18th century, they become works of art, sponsored and financed by very wealthy, noble people who, at Christmas time, would have creche scenes in their home with hundreds of figures done by major artists. And the central theme of the creche scene was always great abundance. These are fruit vendors. Look at their fruit carts. They're all just overloaded. Possibly because the belief was that it was Christ who would bring abundance to the poor of Naples, but possibly also because the idea was to show the people that under Charles III, there was abundance and wealth and everyone taken care of under his reign. Conviviality in the Neapolitan creche scenes always. They're sharing bread, food, cheese around the red wine. The typical Neapolitan creche scene has many scenes of the osteria, or the inn. Here's another scene of the inn. And also here in the Neapolitan creche scenes, an important figure is the intermingling of social classes. There's the nobility, there's the poor, there's the working class, there's the derelict, there's the beggar, there's often the card reader. And these people are sitting under the salamis, the cheeses, the breads, the sausages, and there's even a flask of wine hanging on the wall. I'd like you to know that that flask of wine is probably, how big would it be? Let me see. I think it's about an inch. It's probably about an inch. The art of the Neapolitan creche scene makers is extraordinary. Conviviality, it lives on in the festivals of Italy, particularly the sagras, the village food festivals. We're missing them this summer. They go on in all the small towns outside of, all the villages outside of major towns from May to October. And one of my favorites is for Sant'Anna. That's tomorrow, is the Feast of Sant'Anna. And it's around the little church of Sant'Anna up the hill from us. Tomorrow, there's only going to be a mass. And I asked the organizers, what about the Sagra, this country food festival every year? People aren't doing them because of social distancing. It's just not possible. At the Sagras, young people serve. It's all volunteers working. Young people are serving up the goodness. Mediterranean diet foods being served here. There's fish on the left and pasta. This young girl on the right is serving up pasta dishes. And cooking in the kitchen, the volunteers are the elderly people. This woman on the left has made a wonderful frittata of wild asparagus. This man on the right has cooked up the gnocchi for this Sagra. And after the dinner, there'll be ballroom dancing. It goes on from 9 o'clock till 1 in the morning. And so many of the elderly people are dancing 3 nights a week, 2 or 3 hours a night, because they go around to all the different sagras just to take in not just the good food, but the dancing. Dancing went on at the Etruscan banquets, too. This is a depiction of an Etruscan funerary banquet. They're mourning their deceased in joy, singing, dancing, playing the pipes, sharing wine, and sharing food. Conviviality. Sharing wine. This is a Sagra near Assisi. And then again, part of the concept, one of the concepts of the Mediterranean diet is, look at this, intermingling of age groups and social classes. Look at that table. Young people, teenagers, middle-aged, older people, all enjoying local foods, seasonal foods in company. This is a mosaic from Noto. It's called the Villa del Tellaro. Noto is the eastern coast of Sicily. And this is pouring of wine to a guest. And this is 2nd century AD. And this mosaic was found in 2005 In the town of Spello, they were building a parking lot, and they started to uncover a piece of mosaic, and they kept excavating. They have now uncovered 500 square meters of astounding Roman mosaics. And this is a detail of the pouring of the wine to a guest in the Roman mosaic, 1st century AD, the little town of Spello, just east of Assisi in Umbria. This is a delightful mosaic of the picking of the grapes. And this is, again, from Tunis. This is in the Museum of Tunis. And this is 3rd century AD. And you can see some of the birds up there competing with the pickers of the grapes, eating the grapes themselves. And notice that the grapes are loaded into a basket, and then they'll be taken in to the wine press. And I just want to go back to that. They're picking the grapes off the vine. And when I saw this, I don't know, I just said, God, that reminds me of Pino picking our grapes. And there he is under the vine, and he made our wine. And this is him offering you and myself a little glass of vino. On the left is our neighbor, rural neighbor, Pepe. And you can't go visit Pepe without having a glass of his good vino rosso. If you ask him what varieties of grapes are in the wine, he'll just say, they're all different, but they're reds. Doesn't know their particular botanical names. This gentleman is observing the wine that he's just been offered in an inn. This is a 14th century page of an extraordinary publication, if you will call it a publication, 14th century, called the Taquino Sanitatis. And it was a book describing foods to eat in which seasons for your health, how to mix them, cook them with different herbs. And it was all a book based on information written up in the 11th century in Baghdad by a doctor. And then in the 12th century, it was translated into Italian in the courts of Manfredi in Sicily. So this is a scene from the Taquino Sanitatis. That means notebook of good health. This is a delightful depiction here of the stomping of the grapes. And this is from the mausoleum of Santa Costanza in Rome. This is a 3rd century AD mosaic here. And I love the scene on the left. The oxen are dragging in the grapes. They're not budging. They're probably being forced to go uphill. So they're being whipped to pull up those grapes. At the top of the image, you can see, or the scene, you can see Costanza, that would actually be, they called her Santa Costanza. She wasn't a saint at all. Tradition made her a saint. This was Costantina, who was one of the daughters of the Emperor Constantine. And it was Constantine 313 AD who allowed the freedom of cult to the Romans, let us remember. And if we're talking about wine, how not to mention Caravaggio and his Bacchus. And this is a delightful image of a young man, of Bacchus, if you will, drinking wine. This is 16th century. And what I'd like to point out here are a couple things. First of all, Bacchus is generally, how can we say, flamboyantly drunk, if you will. He's held up by satyrs at times in ancient images. He's not able to walk on his own. Look at this young Bacchus by Caravaggio. His head is wreathed with beautiful leaves of the grapevines. He is serene, pleasant face, very genteel. Caravaggio's skill is to be seen in that beautiful glass of wine. Look at the transparency of the glass. Can you see his thumb through the base of the glass? Fruits also in the foreground, and the fruits will all have symbols. There'll be pomegranates for sure. There are pomegranates, symbols of fertility. And you could see the carafe of red wine on the left here. Now, so this is Caravaggio's Bacchus, and this is late 16th century. And here we see Bacchus, as he's usually depicted, on a beautiful maiolica plate of Urbino. And this is 17th century. And here's Bacchus being carried by the satyrs because he can no longer walk. He needs assistance. Here's our neighbor Pepe, always ready, as I mentioned, to offer vino if you come to visit. And I just want to point out something here. His little snack is definitely Mediterranean diet. I just dropped in the afternoon. He asked me to join him for a snack. And what is it? His wine, the bread his wife made, and his prosciutto. And bread and wine in this other image by Caravaggio, the dinner at Emmaus in Italian. And here we see the pairing of bread and wine, fruits in the foreground, part of the Mediterranean diet. And what seems to be on the table? Squab, maybe stuffed pigeon, dove, quail, white meat. And in this image of Lorenzetti in the lower Basilica of Assisi, of St. Francis, the Last Supper, Passover dinner of Christ with his apostles, and again, the presence of bread and wine. And it's wonderful how Lorenzetti has created the scene in a circular form rather than the usual long table to work with the space that he had. And we have Judas in the scene. Can you see him off to the left? He's the one apostle without the halo. He will betray his friend. Please notice on the table, too, lack of forks. There weren't forks in the Middle Ages used on the table. There were knives. On the table is bread. It looks like perhaps lamb in the middle. Forks would be one or two on the table, and it would just be for grabbing the chunk of meat at the time of service. I want to point out the scene on the left. Dog and cat are being fed scraps in the kitchen. Part of the theory of the Mediterranean diet is the use and conservation of foods, and wisely used. And this giving, therefore, of leftover foods to someone who's poor or your animals. And there are the dog and cat being fed the scraps in the kitchen there, and with a beautiful piece of textile, which is typical of the textiles of Siena of the 14th century when this was done by Lorenzetti. In the scene to the right, another dog and cat. They seem to be fighting over the scraps. And this is done by Sodoma. This fresco is 1505, yes, early 16th century, in a Benedictine abbey called Monte Oliveto near Siena. And the Benedictines are eating together. And there's an amusing detail in this scene. Look at the two Benedictines on the right. The one in the foreground on the right is cleverly stealing the roll from his buddy next to him, but his friend notices this. I wonder if he'll smack his hand. And on the table, all elements of the Mediterranean diet, a little bit of wine, water there too, field greens, something else is being served by another one of the friars there, Benedictines. This is called the Lastra of Acqua Rossa. This is a panel in terracotta, which was on an Etruscan tomb in Viterbo. And this dates from the 4th to 5th century BC. And again, look at the dogs under the table, ready for the scraps. Let's see. We talked about the Mediterranean diet and the concept of conviviality. Conviviality, I don't even know if you can say it in English. The sharing and neighborliness of people's relationships over food. This is a detail of a marvelous fresco by Pinturicchio in a church in Spello, right near us. This was done in 1500 to 1501. And this is a scene out in the countryside of a banquet of sharing of foods. The center figure has a red hat on. It's a cardinal. There must have been an important cardinal visiting who they're going to serve a wonderful feast to. The woman in the foreground is drawing water up from the well. And that scene is in this fresco, right out that arch. So let's go back to it. Observe the arch. You see, right out the scene, right out the arch is the scene. And people are still coming to the banquet, coming down the hill. That's probably Lake Trasimeno out there, because that's the lake that Pinturicchio would have known right outside of his own Perugia. And this is the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel asking the Virgin to be the mother of God, and they're His self-portrait is also in this. His self-portrait is on the wall to the right, just behind the Virgin. This is a mosaic from Noto, which is on the eastern coast of Sicily, Roman mosaic of the 2nd century AD, again stressing these sharing of foods together in the Mediterranean diet. And bread and wine. Wine is being served on the right. There are the loaves of bread there. And again, it looks like that what's being feasted here or eaten is a duck or a chicken, but it's poultry. This is the wonderful fresco of Ghirlandaio, which is in the Ogni Santi church in Florence, late 15th century, and Christ with his apostles sharing food. And I'd like you to notice the beautiful textiles, all done in what we call the Assisi cross stitch. It's just a local cross stitch, not just typical of Assisi, but it's traditionally called Assisi cross stitch. And here, this is a detail. I just want to go back. This is the meal here. And you can see Christ, apostle to his left with a knife. There we are. You can see Christ here. And I'd like you to see that they are certainly eating the foods of the Mediterranean diet. The bread, the wine, look at olives and cheese off to the left, 15th century. This is called the Tomb of the Baker. And this is near Porta Romana of Rome. It is on Porta Romana of Rome, 1st century AD. All scenes of the production of bread. And this is the Taccuino Sanitatis, which I've already mentioned. That is the health notebook of the 14th century. These were all really illuminated manuscripts, beautiful illustrations in this Taccuino Sanitatis, or the Good Health Notebook, let's call it. This is 14th century, the baking of the rolls, the bread. And here's a scene from Pompeii, a fresco of Pompeii, the bread vendor. People buying their bread, they've got baskets with them, and notice the bread. It's not really loaves of bread, is it? It's flat bread. This is bread of Pompeii. This was carbonized. This is in the Archaeological Museum of Naples. This is the bread of Pompeii, or typical of the time rather than a loaf. It was a quick bread, if you will. Often enjoyed with figs. Bread and fresh figs was a favorite food of the Romans. This is again depicted in a fresco of Pompeii. So this would be Pompeii. Vesuvius erupted in 79 AD. This was probably from a villa built in maybe the 1st century BC. And you can see again, we have this typical flat bread, which was typical really of the breads of Pompeii. And we have a flat bread in Umbria too. We call it the torta. And Peppa is rolling the torta on the left, and here on the right, she's baked it. It can be baked on the top of the wood stove. It's poor man's bread, the torta. But much of the Mediterranean diet is about what we call the cucina povera, poor people's bread. The bread that can be made, or the foods that can be made from what you grow on the land, without the intervention of extra things that have to be bought at the market. And the torta bread was a way to get extra bread if you had farm workers coming the next day and had to feed a lot, when you didn't have time to make bread in your outdoor bread oven. What could you do? In ancient times, they heated a flat rock in the fireplace and put the dough right on that. Nowadays, they'll do it on the top of their wood-burning stove. Tortas enjoyed at the Sagres, these country village festivals. Here's two people enjoying, looks like pasta, and typical, you split the torta open and put in cheese and prosciutto, or you can split the torta open and you put in sauteed greens, which have been sauteed in garlic and olive oil. This is a Byzantine mosaic in the San Vitale Church in Ravenna. Astounding, stunning Byzantine mosaics of the 5th century AD. And this is called The Welcoming and Hospitality of Abraham. Here, an angel is stopping him from sacrificing his son Isaac, you can see on the right, and enjoying lunch for him. He's invited to enjoy him for lunch, 3 angels. And they've already been served their bread, and now they've been serving what looks to me to be a slice of maybe meat, but more likely poultry. bread is often depicted, the bread vendors in the Neapolitan creche scenes. These figures are probably 7 inches tall at the most, 5 to 7 inches tall. All the beads were made by hand, the earrings, the jewelry, the textiles, let alone the breads and the cheeses that these vendors are carrying. Bread here in this Neapolitan creche scene with cheeses, and again, the theme, the abundance. Look at the baskets full of olives. And this is a scene of the Neapolitan creche scenes. These are all recent Neapolitan creche scenes. There are places in Naples, museums where you can go to and see 18th century, 19th century pieces. There is even a beautiful creche scene in Rome at Piazza Venezia in the church there with hundreds and hundreds of pieces. But this is a recent creche scene of the baker. Bread is sacred. When it's hard, you use it in salad. That's called panzanella, cold bread salad, which Peppa is offering us on the left. So you take the bread, soak it in either water and maybe a bit of vinegar, squeeze it out, add fresh tomatoes, add some salad, add cucumbers, purple onion, and you've made a meal which centers around bread. Peppa's bread on the right is a little bit hard, and what's she doing? Breaking it up and putting it into her fava bean soup. Mediterranean diet, that's chickpea soup, frequent use of legumes in the Mediterranean diet. This is our farm woman friend, Mandina, in 1976. I'm there in the background. She's carrying her loaves of bread back up into her kitchen, coming from her bread oven. Some of you saw other pictures of Mandina and her husband, Pepe, in my talk, Rural Life Revisited. And by the way, let me mention now that is on my website on the virtual experiences page. Every single talk I'm giving appears on my website, and I have a YouTube page called Anne Robichaud. Bread ovens in Pompeii. These are the bread ovens of Pompeii. They were probably made in the 1st century BC. Here we have a farm friend, Giuseppa. She lives near Deruta. Behind her is her bread oven. And out of that bread oven came, you're just seeing a few of them, about 12 loaves of the cheese bread that is made in Umbria. It's a tradition for Easter Sunday morning. This is our daughter-in-law, Francesca, with our son, Keegan. And Francesca made us a cheese bread last Easter. And the table is set. They weren't there in time for Easter breakfast, so we were going to have it as an antipasto for the lunch that day, I remember. But traditionally, on Holy Saturday afternoon, the farm women go to the local church. These are 3 of our farm friends, Juliana on the right, Chiarina, and Rita, and they have their baskets, which will be blessed by the priest. And inside there, by the time they get in the door, there'll be at least 25 baskets laid out in front of the altar. The priest will bless them all. And then the foods in the baskets are eaten for Easter Sunday morning. Red wine, salami, prosciutto, or capocolo. Juliana here has salami. The cheese bread, hard-boiled eggs with a pinch of salt. That's propitious, and that's Easter Sunday breakfast. Torta al formaggio, cheese bread, wine topped with salami or capocolo or prosciutto. Here are some of the baskets in front of the altar and displayed with beautiful lacework, of course, because, the innate aesthetic sense of the Italians. The baskets are absolutely gorgeous. Many of them, the foods are wrapped in embroidered cloths the women have made. Here is a flatbread of Pompeii in a fresco of Pompeii, 100 BC. But next to the flatbread is also a sweet of Pompeii, made with fruits, dates, and figs. And this is a stunning fresco of a villa of Aplontis. Aplontis today is called Torre Annunziata. It's north of Pompeii. It was between Pompeii and Herculaneum, and it too was covered by the ash and the lava in 100 AD. In excavation of a villa there, they found this beautiful fresco on the wall. It's a stunning fresco of a beautiful suite sitting on a marble top table. The marble is all incised and carved, and that suite seems to be the Casata Siciliana. This is a pride sweet of Sicily, made with ricotta, a lot of candied fruits. Look at this photo of a cassata, and look at that. Doesn't it seem to be reminiscent of the cassata? And here you see the cassata in this Neapolitan creche scene. It's the sweet with the border of green on the right. And this is a creche scene of Christmas time, Christmas celebration, because all the sweets on the table are those typically eaten at Naples at Christmas time. And look at that jovial woman is about to open the wine to serve along with the sweets. Figs, Villa of Aplontis, 100 BC, green and purple figs in a beautifully depicted basket in fresco. And this is also from a villa wall of Aplontis. These are peaches and pomegranates in a transparent glass vase with twisted handles at each end. Can you see that? How beautiful. Probably blown glass. Isn't that stunning? 100 BC of Oplontis. To be seen, by the way, on your next trip. See Pompeii, see Herculaneum, and see the villas of Oplontis, Torre Annunziata. This too is from a fresco of a wall of the Villa of Aplontis, peaches, and look at the glass filled with water. Will you look at the transparency? Through the glass, can't you see the wall behind the glass? And fruit here in a basket as well. And this is a depiction of a floor mosaic of the 3rd century AD of Tunis, North Africa. Pompeii, 1st century BC, fruit, again in a beautiful glass bowl. Pomegranate on the lower left, popped open because the seeds will symbolize fertility. This could be a good omen. Maybe that was in the bedroom of a villa, who knows? And how not to mention Caravaggio's beautiful basket of fruit. His basket of fruit, I believe this is late 16th century. A lot of symbolism in this. This was a commission for a cardinal. I believe it was Cardinal Borromeo. And the basket represents the church, the fruit, the clergy, the abundance that will be given to humanity as needed by the clergy. But also, please notice the fruit. Look at the apple in the foreground. It seems to be a bad spot on it. There's 2 bad spots on it. Look at some of the leaves of the fruit at the top. They're worn, they're tattered. This is also symbolizing the transiency. Do we say that word in English? I think that life is transient and will not last forever. Even some of the grapes seem to have been eaten, or they're not perfect, the green grapes here on the left. Caravaggio, 16th century, 1600s, 17th century, but Arcimboldo, isn't he something? Arcimboldo, 16th century, and he actually knew the works of Leonardo da Vinci. He was from Milan. Leonardo da Vinci lived in Milan about 100 years before he did. But rather than depicting anything with fruits and vegetables that's symbolic, he just is about good times and enjoyment and fun. One thing I want to point out about this one is in this Arcimboldo oil painting, there's 2 tomatoes, and this was done 17th century. And the tomatoes, remember, are foods from the New World, as are the zucchini. Their origin is Mexico. So these are foods which have entered the Mediterranean diet just for about 100 years. This is his wonderful ortolano. It's a fun oil painting viewed to be flipped over 180 degrees. So on the left, you have just a metal container of fruits and vegetables. Look what it is when you flip it to the right. When you flip it over, pardon me, the image on the right. Mediterranean diet, here it is on our kitchen table on a July day. We were talking about fruits integral to the diet, but can be paired with salty foods in the Mediterranean diet, like prosciutto. The peaches there are in the background. There's cheeses, fresh tomatoes, zucchini, cucumbers with purple onion, and greens cooked on the right. So this too could almost be turned into a painting. What I want to mention about this is another important element of the Mediterranean diet. All of the containers used to hold the food and for the transport of food, whether in ceramics or glass or woven baskets or whatever, are considered part of the Mediterranean diet. Not just the eating and enjoyment of good foods, but in beautiful artisanal works. Here we have some Deruta ceramics, Sicilian ceramics, and southern Naples ceramics as well. So the containers of the foods are as important as the foods themselves in the Mediterranean diet. That is, they're to be preserved, they're to be recognized. Like these baskets used to display the fruits at the market. They're not just displaying the fruits in plastic containers, are they? Baskets as much as possible. Abundance in the Mediterranean diet and depicted in the Neapolitan creche scenes. Because this is a row of statues, these for on sale in the street of the creche scene makers via San Gregorio Armeno in Naples. And they're all vendors of fruits and vegetables, every single cart demonstrating huge abundance. And the market and festivals are to be preserved as a way of sharing the foods in the Mediterranean diet. And the markets too will always demonstrate abundance. Fruits as well as vegetables are sold at the markets. And these are some vegetables that we eat in summertime. Here on the left, some grilled vegetables, of course, a little vino along with them. And on the right, I just took this photo this morning just to show you. This is a bowl here from Umbria, but it's typical of the Vietri ceramics with the bandiera in it. Bandiera means the flag, and it's a simmering of green, red, and white vegetables like the Italian flag. So peppers and zucchini, tomatoes, and white onion. But again, I just put it in here because to underscore this other tenet of the Mediterranean diet, that the containers in which the foods are presented are all part of the phenomenon of the Mediterranean diet. The sharing in the shopping as well. Conviviality, not just in the eating, but in the selection and the shopping. And not just fresh fruits, but dried fruits are part of the Mediterranean diet, and consumption of dried fruits, especially as snacks. The consumption of legumes. Here we have, and seeds, pardon me. These are all snacks for nibbling. Pumpkin seeds, peanuts, pistachios, etc. And legumes, abundance of legumes. We have an extraordinary variety of legumes. Just in Umbria, we have the beans of Lake Trasimeno, certain lentils of Castelluccio up near Norcia. This is a delightful painting by Annibale Carracci, 16th century, called The Bean Eater, the eater of the beans. And there he is with his fagioli, his vino rosso, his bread, and what is in the foreground? Maybe slices of prosciutto or capocolo. And the Bean Festival near Foligno every year celebrates beans, fagioli. It's called La Sagra dei Fagioli, the Festival of Beans. And they serve the most extraordinary dishes made of beans, including even cakes, which have fagioli. As I mentioned, the lentils of Castelluccio are a particular lentil grown only in the southeastern mountain area of Umbria and can be grown nowhere else in the world. Top tier with bruschetta and some sheep's milk cheese, pecorino. Here's another image of the bean eater. This is by Vincenzo Campi, 17th century. Look at the little one crying. I think he's saying, you're taking my beans, because after all, that gentleman up there seems to be eating beans out of a small dish. Whatever, the baby's mother thinks it's all quite delightful. One of the favored legumes of Umbria, especially in springtime, is fava, fresh fava beans, or fava beans here were cooked with mint, served with bread, with red wine. Peppa will dry her fava beans, and then in the winter we'll always have fava bean soup as needed, because she dries her beans to preserve them. Fava beans are enjoyed with pecorino cheese, sheep's milk cheese, and the markets sell not only fruits and vegetables, but of course cheeses. You can see some on the right. Pino here is buying some pecorino cheese from the cheese vendor who sells not just cheeses, but prosciutto, capocollo, salami, etc. Pino is making great cheese these days himself from our goat's milk. Here he's making one of our, not pecorino, which means sheep cheese, but caprino, which means goat cheese. The word in Italian for goat is capra. In Italian for sheep, it's pecora. So pecorino and caprino. And this is the Taccuino Sanitatis, that notebook of health of the 14th century, showing the making of ricotta there. And this is the eating of ricotta, enjoyed in an oil painting of Vincenzo Campi, 17th century. I don't know if the woman is just about the serving, and I hope she gets some too, but it seems that the men have the wooden spoons in this one. There's no better ricotta than Pino's. The markets also include not just the selling of fruits and vegetables, but the selling of seafood. And here is seafood depicted in a Pompeii mosaic of 100 BC. Fish is hanging up there, maybe at the market of Pompeii, with fowl. Hanging to the right, bunches of dates. In the foreground, some greens and another fish. And this is the fish market of central Naples. Fish market scenes are depicted in the Neapolitan creche scenes. And this is a stunning fresco of the 6th century BC in the Tomb of the Fishing. And this is, I believe, Cerveteri. Again, southern Latium. This is a wonderful mosaic of Pompeii, 1st century BC, showing the abundance of fish in the Mediterranean Sea. At times, those fish mosaics were also depicting fish in the pools in which they raised fish. So they didn't just simply fish for fish. The villas also had, many of them had pools where they raised their own fish for use on the table of the villa owner. And there, the photos, I just want to show you these again. These are some of the seafoods. And here, these are seafoods turned into a wonderful dish of pasta ai frutti di mare, or pasta with seafoods. Again, served in a beautiful ceramic dish. This is southern Italy. This is the ceramics of Vietri. This is absolutely astounding to me. This is from Pompeii. This is 3rd century BC. Doesn't that look contemporary? And this is a plate for the serving of fish. And I just want to remember the name. I wrote it down for myself. In the center of that is the little bowl for the pudding. I think it's called tassia. The sauce, it's a spicy sauce which they dip the fish into. You can see there's a bowl in the center. So this is I think this is 2nd to 3rd BC. And here again, seafood with a glass of wine. And this is an extraordinary, again, plate for the serving of fish with a little cup in the center for the spicy fish dipping sauce. And this is actually from Melfi, 4th century BC. Melfi is a town in Basilicata. Imagine Italy. It's the instep of the boot. And it was at the time a city of Magna Grecia, or the Greater Greece. Southern Italy, from Naples to all of Sicily, was Greek. Here's the fishing scene. In this also is in the Tunis Museum, the Bardo. This is 3rd century AD. Pino enjoying fish on the island of Elba on the left, and fish here is on the right. And I would like to say salute as we almost end here. With a little bit of glass of white wine, we're enjoying seafood at our favorite place to vacation when we can, the island of Ventotene. Don't miss it, just south of Rome. And here we're going to conclude a little bit with observation of a market of Palermo. This is the Vucceria. Pino, my husband, is from Palermo. And Vucceria comes from the word boucherie, from the French, butcher, because at the Vucceria, the first stalls were of butchers. There's still butcher stalls at the Vucceria, but now there are stalls of fruit vendors, fish vendors, everything at the Vucceria. And the name originally comes from boucherie, but now in Palermitano dialect, Vucceria or Vucceria means confusion. Vucceria, a place of confusion. This is a place of confusion where vendors shout their wares one over the other in Palermitano dialect, and immortalized in this extraordinary painting by the Sicilian painter Renato Guttuso. This is 1976, his oil painting called La Vucceria. You can see the seafood for sale on the left, wild fennel on the right, hunks of beef hanging down, the cheeses, and so forth. And this really epitomizes the Mediterranean diet. Fresh, seasonal foods, purchased at the market if possible, eaten fresh, without the intervention of, without the intervention of anything that's that's changing the food from its natural state. There's the simple cooking of it. In contrast to this scene of the Vucceria, I'd like to close with, you may not know Renato Guttuso, this painter of 1976, but I'd like to close this discussion with a painting that I'm sure is familiar to all of you. And it was done about 15 years before Renato Guttuso's. Andy Warhol's 32 Cans of Tomato Soup. And this is figuratively and literally half a world away from Vucceria, about the Italian market, so emulated in the Italian diet by Renato Guttuso. So please, everybody, do eat as close as you can to the Mediterranean diet wherever you are. Enjoy it, and come soon to Italy. Enjoy it with us at our house. The invitation is open to come and feast with us. Grazie.